The wind that night was not merely a movement of air, but a living, malevolent thing that scoured the high desert plains. It tore through the gaps in the wooden structures of Silver Creek, whistling with a pitch that sounded like a low scream, carrying with it the grit of 1,000 miles of dry earth. Lantern light flickered weakly behind the frosted glass of the storefronts, casting long, shivering shadows across the rutted dirt of the main street. It was the kind of night that drove coyotes into the arroyos and made men drink until they could no longer hear the rattling of the window panes. Nora Hayes pushed open the heavy oak door of the Broken Spur Saloon and stepped out into the chill. The noise of the room behind her, the clinking of cheap glass, the discordant hammering of a piano that had not been tuned in 5 years, the roar of laughter that was more aggressive than joyful, cut off abruptly as the door slammed shut. The silence of the street was heavy, broken only by that relentless wind. She was 25 years old, though the lines at the corners of her eyes and the set of her jaw made her look older. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. It was a thin thing, wool worn threadbare in patches, gray as the dust that coated the hem of her dress. She began the walk toward her rooming house, keeping her head down, her boots crunching softly on the half-frozen mud. Inside the saloon, the air had been thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. Tonight had been harder than most. A cattle drover from down south had kept his hand on her waist for too long, his fingers digging into her ribs as if checking the quality of livestock. When she had pulled away, forcing a polite smile, he had made a crude joke about the price of her company that set the whole table laughing. The other girls, women who had been hardened by this life far longer than she had, whispered in the corner near the bar. They said Nora gave herself airs. They said she acted like she was too good to be a saloon girl, but they also noted, with a mix of envy and scorn, that she earned good tips precisely because she seemed so untouchable. But outside, in the unforgiving dark of the town, there was no illusion of worth. As she passed the darkened window of the general store, Nora saw her own reflection, a ghost in the glass. She looked away quickly. 2 days ago, she had walked this same street in daylight and passed Mrs. Gable, the banker's wife. Mrs. Gable had gathered her skirts and crossed to the other side of the road, shielding her young daughter's eyes as if Nora carried a contagion that could be caught by a mere glance. That girl, that was what they called her now. Not Nora, not the daughter of John Hayes, the saddle-maker who had died when a horse kicked him in the chest. Just that girl, the ruined one. She turned the corner near the livery stable, and her breath hitched. The smell of wet hay and manure always brought it back, visceral and sharp. 3 years. It had been 3 years since the night that hurt. Yet the memory did not fade. It only grew heavier, like a stone she was forced to carry in her pocket. It came to her now in flashes, unbidden and violent. The smell of cheap whiskey on hot breath, the rough grip of hands that were strong from roping cattle. There had been 3 of them, sons of the local ranchers, boys she had gone to school with, boys who had decided that Nora Hayes, with her quiet ways and no father to protect her, was theirs for the taking. She remembered the sound of her own dress tearing, a sound louder than the laughter. She remembered the grit of the alley dirt against her cheek and the crushing weight of them. She had woken up bruised and bleeding, and she had gone to the sheriff. She had gone to Sheriff Harlan with blood drying in her hair, believing in the law. Harlan had looked at her from behind his desk, his eyes sliding away from her bruised face. He had told her that the Claiborne boy and his friends were good stock. He had asked her what she had done to lead them on. He had told her to go home and wash up and stop telling lies that would ruin young men's futures. The town had followed his lead. Within a week, no respectable woman would hire her for seamstress work. The doors that had been opened to her were bolted shut. The saloon was the only place that did not care where she had been or what had been done to her, as long as she could carry a tray and tolerate a man's stare. Nora shivered, though not entirely from the cold. The wind stung her cheeks, numb and raw. To her left, the dry creek bed was a gash of blackness in the moonlight. High above, the stars were sharp and indifferent. millions of cold eyes looking down on a world that offered no mercy. She paused near the church at the edge of town. It was a simple white structure, the paint peeling on the north side. She could hear, in the library of her memory, the sound of a hymn being sung, a slow, mournful tune about rivers of grace. She had not stepped past the threshold in 3 years. The Sunday after the assault, the preacher's wife had met her at the steps and spoken in a hushed, venomous whisper, asking her not to frighten the congregation with her presence. Nora had turned around and walked away, and she had never gone back. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the ache in her bones, and forced her feet to move. One step, then another. That was how she survived. You did not look at the horizon. You looked at the ground in front of your boots, and you took one step. Cole Maddox rode into Silver Creek just as the last of the sun was bleeding out into the western hills, leaving the sky a bruised purple. He rode a bay gelding that was as road-weary as he was, its coat dull with dust, its head low. Cole sat easy in the saddle, a posture learned from 20 years of riding across territories that wanted to kill him. He wore a canvas coat that had once been tan, but was now the color of the trail, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. A scar ran along his jawline, a jagged white line interrupted by the darker stubble of a 3-day beard. His eyes, blue and sharp as flint, moved constantly, scanning the rooftops, the alley mouths, the shadows between buildings. He did not like the look of this town. It had the feeling of a place that had given up. The buildings sagged as if exhausted by their own existence. The only thing that looked new and well-maintained was the sign painted on the side of the general store, a massive, stylized brand of a C inside a circle, the mark of the Claiborne Ranch. It was painted high and large, looming over the street like a feudal banner. He rode past the sheriff's office. The whitewash was fresh, but the windows were grimy, opaque with filth. That told Cole everything he needed to know about the law in Silver Creek. It was for show. He turned the bay into the livery stable. The interior was warm and smelled of horses, a scent that always settled Cole's nerves. A stable boy, no older than 15 with a shock of straw-colored hair, emerged from a stall, wiping his hands on a rag. "Evening," the boy said, eyeing Cole's horse. "He looks ridden hard." "He has been," Cole said. His voice was a low rumble, rusty from disuse, grain in a stall for the night. "And check his left foreshoe. It feels loose." The boy nodded, taking the reins. "You passing through, mister?" "Just passing." Cole dismounted, his boots hitting the straw with a heavy thud. He stretched his back, hearing the vertebrae pop. "Is there work to be had here?" The boy shrugged. "Mister, Claiborne is hiring riders. Mostly. He always is. But you have to be okay with his way of doing things." "And what way is that?" Cole asked, unbuckling his saddlebags. The boy lowered his voice, glancing toward the open barn doors. "The way that says he owns the law. If you ride for Claiborne, you ride rough." Cole nodded once, acknowledging the warning. He had known men like Claiborne. He had worked for them. Once, a lifetime ago. He dug a coin out of his pocket, a silver dollar, worn smooth, and flipped it to the boy. "Treat the horse well." He walked out into the gathering dark, slinging his saddlebags over his shoulder. His stomach rumbled, a hollow reminder that he had not eaten since daybreak. As he walked toward the lights of the saloon, his mind drifted back to the thing he was trying to outrun. It was always there, hovering at the edge of his thoughts. The heat of the New Mexico sun, the weight of the Colt in his hand, the face of the man he had killed. They called him a pillar of the community, a deacon, a good man. Cole knew better. He knew about the bruises on the man's wife, the fear in the eyes of his children, but none of that mattered when the bullets flew. Cole had drawn faster, and the good man had fallen, and the town had turned into a pack of wolves. Self-defense, Cole thought bitterly. It was always self-defense, but the dead man's family had money and anger, and the truth was a flexible thing when gold was involved. So Cole drifted. He moved from town to town, using false names when he had to, staying quiet, hoping to find a place where the ghosts could not find him. He pushed into the saloon. The heat hit him first, then the noise. The room was crowded. Men stood shoulder to shoulder at the bar, drinking amber whiskey from dirty glasses. A card game was in progress at a corner table, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Cole found a small, empty table near the back wall. He sat with his back to the timber, facing the door. It was a habit he could not break. He signaled for a drink and a meal. That was when he saw her. She was moving through the crowd with a tray balanced on one hand, dodging the grasping hands of the patrons with a practiced, weary grace. She wore a dress of dark blue satin that had seen better days, cut low in the style of the trade, but she wore it like armor, not an invitation. Cole watched her. He saw the fatigue in her eyes, a deep, bruising exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. He saw the way she stiffened when a burly ranch foreman shouted, "Hey, Ruin, get over here and pour." Ruin, it was a cruel name, spoken with a sneer. The woman didn't flinch, but Cole saw her chin lift a fraction of an inch, a tiny gesture of defiance. She walked to the foreman's table, poured the drinks, and stepped back quickly before he could grab her wrist. A moment later, she approached Cole's table, up close. She was striking, though her face was pale and drawn. She had dark hair piled up loosely, strands escaping to frame her neck. "What can I get you?" she asked. Her voice was flat, guarded. "Steak. If the cook has any left," Cole said. "And coffee. Black." She looked up from her notepad, surprised. Most men here ordered whiskey before they sat down. She met his eyes, and for a second, the noise of the saloon seemed to fade. Cole looked at her, really looked at her, not as a servant or a piece of scenery, but as a human being standing in front of him. "I will see what I can do," she said. "Thank you, Miss," Cole said. She paused, her pen hovering over the paper. The word seemed to hang in the air. "Miss, not girl, not Ruin." She gave him a short, sharp nod and turned away. When she returned with the food, a tough-looking steak and a pile of beans, she lingered for a moment, wiping down the edge of the table. "You are new here," she said. It was not really a question. "Just passing through," Cole said. He cut into the steak. It was barely warm, but he was too hungry to complain. "You heading west?" she asked. "Don't know yet," Cole answered honestly. "Wherever the work is." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face, lingering on the scar. "Be careful who you ask for work around here," she said softly. "Some wages cost more than time." Cole paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at her, seeing the intelligence behind the wariness. "I heard the name Claiborne. He said—" She flinched. The reaction was subtle, a tightening of the muscles around her mouth. But he saw it. "If you want to keep your soul, you will steer clear of that brand," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. She straightened up as the barkeep shouted her name. "Enjoy your meal, Mr.—" Cole watched her walk away, realizing that he had not felt this intrigued by a person in a very long time. The hours passed. The saloon began to empty as men stumbled out into the cold or passed out in their chairs. Cole finished his meal and nursed a single whiskey, watching the room until the barkeep began to blow out the lanterns. He paid his tab, leaving a generous coin on the table, and headed for the door. He had arranged for a room at the boarding house down the street, a place that promised clean sheets and no bed bugs. He stepped out into the alleyway that ran alongside the saloon, intending to cut across to the main street. The wind had picked up, howling through the narrow space. Then he heard it, a scuffle, a muffled cry. Cole froze. He tilted his head, listening. "Please, let me go," a woman's voice gasped. It was tight with panic. A man laughed, a wet, slurred sound. "Come on, Nora." "Don't be like that. You know you want it. You're barely worth the price of a drink anyway." Cole moved. He did not run. He flowed, his boots silent on the earth. He rounded the corner of the building and saw them in the shadows. Nora was pressed back against the rough wood of the saloon wall. A man was pinning her there, his body crushing hers. He wore a deputy's badge on his vest, the metal glinting in the stray moonlight. He had one hand tangled in her hair, yanking her head back, while the other fumbled at her waist. "No!" Nora cried out, struggling, scratching at his face. The deputy slapped her, a sharp crack that echoed in the alley. "Shut up," he hissed. "No one cares what happens to you. You are fallen, remember? I am just helping you down." Rage, cold and white, flooded Cole's chest. It was the same rage he had felt toward the deacon, the same intolerance for bullies that had ruined his life. He stepped forward and grabbed the deputy by the back of his collar. With a heave of his shoulders, Cole ripped the man away from Nora and threw him backward. The deputy, drunk and off balance, stumbled and fell hard into the dust. He scrambled up, his hand going to the gun at his hip. "Who the hell?" Cole stepped in close, knocking the man's hand away from the holster before he could draw. He drove a fist into the deputy's gut, doubling him over, then followed it with a hard right hook to the jaw. The deputy, Travis was his name, Cole would later learn, spun around and crashed into a pile of empty crates. Glass shattered. Travis groaned, spitting blood, and tried to rise. Cole was on him in a second. He grabbed Travis by the front of his shirt and slammed him back against the wall. Cole's face was inches from the deputy's, his eyes like chips of ice. Travis blinked, trying to focus. His breath smelled of stale beer and fear. "Do you know who I am? I am the law. You are a disgrace to the tin you are wearing," Cole said. His voice was low, deadly, and perfectly measured. It was the voice of a man who had looked death in the face and not blinked. Travis struggled, but Cole's grip was iron. "If I ever see you touch her again," Cole said, emphasizing every word, "if I even hear that you looked at her wrong, I will come for you, and I won't be as polite next time. Do you understand?" Travis swallowed hard. The sobering reality of violence had cut through his drunkenness. He nodded weakly. Cole let him go. Travis stumbled sideways, clutching his jaw. "You will regret this, drifter," he shouted, his voice cracking as he backed away. "I will tell Sheriff Harlan. You are a dead man." Travis turned and ran, stumbling out of the alley and into the street. Cole stood still for a moment, letting his breathing slow. He adjusted his coat, checking that his own gun was still secure. Then he turned to Nora. She was sliding down the wall, her legs giving way. She hit the ground, pulling her knees to her chest, her entire body shaking violently. Cole approached her slowly, hands visible, palms open. "Miss." Nora looked up. Her eyes were wide, vast pools of terror in the darkness. She was gasping for air, short, sharp breaths that sounded like sobbing. "I can't," she choked out. "I can't keep doing this. It is all right," Cole said gently. "He is gone. He is coming back," she whispered. "They always come back. It never stops. It is like drowning. Every single day. Drowning." Her composure, the wall she had built around herself for 3 years, shattered. She buried her face in her hands and wept, a raw, ugly sound of despair that tore at Cole's heart. He looked around. The alley was too exposed, too cold. "Come on," he said. He reached down, not grabbing her, but offering a hand. She stared at it for a long moment, then reached out. Her fingers were ice cold. He helped her up and guided her away from the saloon, around the back of the livery stable where the wind was blocked by the hay bales. It was quiet here. The smell of the horses was comforting. Nora leaned against the stable wall, hugging herself. She was shivering uncontrollably. Cole unbuttoned his canvas coat and took it off. He draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy and warm, smelling of tobacco and sagebrush. Nora pulled the coat tight, burying her nose in the collar. "Thank you," she whispered. Cole stood a few feet away, leaning against a fence post. He rolled a cigarette but did not light it. He just needed something to do with his hands. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You don't know me. You don't know what I am." "I know a man forcing a woman is wrong," Cole said simply. "Doesn't matter who the woman is. Or who the man is. He is the deputy," Nora said bitterly. "You just made an enemy of the whole town." "I have had enemies before," Cole said. They stood in silence for a long time. The stars overhead were brilliant, piercing the black canopy of the night. The wind howled around the corner, but in this small pocket of shelter, it was still. Nora looked up at the sky. "I don't care about tomorrow," she said suddenly. Cole looked at her. "What do you mean?" She turned her gaze to him. Her eyes were dry now, but they burned with a strange, fierce light. "I am so tired of being afraid of what happens next, of who is going to hurt me, of what they are going to say." She took a step toward him. The oversized coat swamped her frame, making her look small. Yet she stood tall. "I don't care about tomorrow," she repeated. "I just want tonight to be quiet. I want one night where I am not scared, where I am not alone, where no one is looking at me like I am dirt." Cole looked at her, and he felt a shifting in his chest, a cracking of the armor he had worn for so long. He saw a kindred spirit in her, someone wounded, hunted, and deeply, achingly lonely. He wanted to reach out and hold her. He wanted to promise her that he would protect her. But he was afraid. He was afraid of his own violence, afraid that he was just another dangerous man in a long line of them. "I can stay," he said, his voice rough. "I can stay right here until the sun comes up. No one will come near you." Nora looked at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. She found none. She saw only a tired man with a scar and sad eyes. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest, right over his heart. Cole froze for a heartbeat. Then slowly, hesitantly, he raised his hands. He did not embrace her fully. He just placed his hands lightly on her arms, over the thick canvas of his coat. They stood there in the shadow of the livery, the cowboy and the outcast, huddled together against the cold and the dark. Nora closed her eyes, listening to the steady, rhythmic thud of his heart. For the first time in 3 years, the terror receded, replaced by a warmth that had nothing to do with the code. She didn't care about the deputy, or the sheriff, or the dawn that would bring consequences. She was warm. She was safe. And for tonight, that was enough. Nora Hayes woke to the sound of a wagon wheel groaning against the rutted earth of the street below. For a long, disoriented moment, she lay still, staring at the water stains on the plaster ceiling of her rented room. The morning light filtering through the thin curtains was gray and weak, promising another day of biting wind. But the air inside the room felt different. It felt heavier, charged with the memory of the night before. She sat up slowly, pulling the thin quilt around her shoulders. Her eyes went immediately to the wooden chair in the corner. There it was, the canvas coat. She had folded it neatly before collapsing into a sleep that was deeper than any she had known in years. It was a heavy, utilitarian thing, stained with the dust of the trail, and smelling faintly of tobacco and horse sweat. To anyone else, it was just a piece of clothing, discarded by a drifter. To Nora, sitting there in the pale light, it looked like a shield. She rose, her bare feet cold on the floorboards, and walked over to it. She ran her fingers over the rough fabric of the collar. It was real. He had been real. Downstairs, the day had already begun, and with it, the poison of Silver Creek. Nora dressed quickly, her hands shaking as she buttoned her high-collared work dress. As she descended the narrow staircase to the saloon's main floor, the voices drifted up to her. The morning crowd was thin, a few old-timers nursing coffee and hair of the dog, but the talk was lively. "I tell you, he came at me like a mad dog," a voice was saying. It was Travis. Nora paused on the landing, her hand gripping the banister until her knuckles turned white. Travis was sitting at the bar, holding a raw piece of beefsteak to his jaw, which was swollen purple. He was speaking to the barkeep and 2 local ranchers. "I was just doing my rounds, checking the alley." Travis lied, his voice thick with self-righteous indignation. "I saw him lurking back there, looking to rob the place or worse. When I asked him to move along, he jumped me, sucker punched me. A man like that is dangerous. I tell you, he is a killer waiting for a reason." Nora felt a surge of nausea. It was the same story as 3 years ago, just a different variation. The truth did not matter in Silver Creek. Only the volume of the lie mattered. And who was telling it? She wanted to scream, to run down the stairs and call him a liar to his face, but she knew it would do no good. Her word was worth less than the dust on the floor. She slipped out the back door before anyone noticed her, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. 2 streets over, the morning sun was doing little to warm the interior of the sheriff's office. It was a cramped, airless space that smelled of stale cigar smoke and unwashed bodies. Sheriff Harlan sat behind his desk, his boots propped up on a stack of legal papers he likely had never read. Cole Maddox stood on the other side of the desk, his hat in his hand. He looked calm, but every muscle in his body was coiled tight. "So," Harlan said, picking at his teeth with a splinter of wood, "Deputy Travis tells me you have a problem with authority." "I have a problem with men who beat women," Cole said. His voice was even, devoid of the fear Harlan was used to smelling on drifters. Harlan chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the glass of a whiskey bottle clinking against wood, though he did not take it out. "You are new here, stranger. You don't know the ways of this town? And you certainly don't know Nora Hayes." "I know enough," Cole said. "You know what she is?" Harlan asked, his eyes narrowing. "She is a saloon girl. She is damaged goods. That isn't much of a woman to defend. Friend, you go throwing punches for the likes of her, and you are going to find yourself in a hole you can't climb out of." Cole's grip on his hat tightened, the leather creaking softly. "The only hole I worry about is the one 6 feet deep, Sheriff, and I don't plan on filling it today." Harlan dropped his feet to the floor with a heavy thud. He leaned forward, his face hardening. "I don't want trouble in my town. You ride on, or you keep your head down. If I hear you raised a hand against my deputy again, I will lock you up until you rot. Do I make myself clear?" "Crystal," Cole said. He turned to leave. As he reached the door, his eyes swept over the bulletin board on the wall. It was a chaotic collage of paper, notices for auctions, stray cattle, and faces of men wanted for everything from horse thievery to murder. Cole stopped. His heart skipped a beat, then slammed against his ribs. There, half buried under a notice for a church social, was a sketch. It was a crude drawing, done in charcoal, but the line of the jaw and the set of the eyes were unmistakable. The name underneath read Elias Thorne. It was an old poster, the paper yellowed and brittle, curling at the corners. It described a crime in New Mexico territory, 5 years ago. Murder of a prominent citizen. Cole glanced back at Harlan. The sheriff was busy pouring a measure of whiskey into a tin cup, his back turned, with a movement so fast and fluid it was almost invisible. Cole reached out. He snagged the corner of the poster and ripped it free from the tack in one smooth motion. He crumpled it and shoved it deep into his coat pocket. He stepped out onto the boardwalk, the cool air hitting his face. He walked briskly until he was around the corner, his hands still clenched around the paper in his pocket. He didn't need to look at it again. He knew what it said. It was the past he had been running from, the name he had buried, surfacing here at the edge of the world. He should leave. His instincts, sharpened by years of survival, screamed at him to saddle the bay and ride until the mountains were a blue line behind him. But then he thought of Nora. He thought of her shaking in the alley and the way she had looked at him in the moonlight, as if he were the first water she had seen in a desert. He cursed softly under his breath. He wasn't going anywhere, not yet. Cole rode out of town an hour later, heading for the rolling scrubland to the north. He had heard at the livery that the widow Klein was looking for help, though she couldn't pay much. The Klein ranch was a humble spread, a small house built of sod and timber that seemed to be sinking slowly into the earth. The fences were sagging, and the barn leaned precariously to the left. Mrs. Klein was a woman carved from granite and dried apple skin. She stood on her porch with a shotgun broken over her arm, watching Cole ride up. She listened to his offer of work without blinking. "I can't pay top wages," she said, her voice raspy. $20 a month and found, and the roof in the bunkhouse leaks." I can fix a roof, Cole said. And 20 is fine. She narrowed her eyes. Studying him, she looked at the scar on his jaw, the gun on his hip, and the way he sat his horse. Most men who take $20 have a reason to hide. Mr. Maddox, or they are useless drunks. Which are you? I am not a drunk. Ma'am, Cole said. She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. There is honesty in your eyes, even if there is trouble in your face. Put your horse in the barn. You can start on the south fence line. It is down in 3 places. The days that followed were a blur of grueling labor. The landscape here was not the romantic vista of paintings. It was a harsh, unforgiving adversary. Cole spent his days wrestling with a rusted barbed wire that tore at his gloves and hands. He dug post holes in earth that was baked as hard as iron, swinging a sledgehammer until his shoulders burned with a fire that did not go away when he slept. The wind was constant. It drove grit into his eyes, his teeth, his pores. Some days, dust storms would rise up out of nowhere, turning the sky a bruised orange and reducing visibility to the length of his arm. Other days, the temperature would plummet, the clear desert air turning brittle with cold that ached in his old wounds. But there was a peace in the work. It was simple. A fence was either fixed or it wasn't. A cow was either found or it was lost. It was not like the tangled mess of human lives. Every few days, he rode into Silver Creek for supplies, nails, flour, coffee, and every time, he went to the saloon. He would sit at a back table, nursing a beer he didn't really want, just to see her. Nora would be there, moving through the smoke and the noise. They rarely spoke. It was too dangerous, with Travis and his cronies often watching, but the communication between them was constant. It was in the way her eyes found his the moment he walked through the doors. It was in the way she would linger for a split second when she wiped the table next to his. It was a language of small glances, of slightly prolonged eye contact that carried a weight of unspoken feeling. I am here, his eyes said. I know. Hers replied. Be careful. For Nora. The days were a torment of conflicting desires. She found herself waking up with a strange new sensation in her chest. Anticipation. For 3 years, her mornings had been gray voids of dread. Now, she caught herself looking in the mirror, pinching her cheeks to bring some color to them, smoothing her hair. But the fear was always there, riding shotgun with the hope. She saw the way Travis watched Cole when he came into town. She saw the way Sheriff Harlan's eyes tracked him. She knew that by staying, by looking at her, Cole was painting a target on his back. She told herself she should tell him to leave. She should be cold to him, drive him away for his own good. She had nothing to offer a man but a ruined reputation and a town full of enemies. But then she would remember the weight of his coat on her shoulders, and the resolve would crumble. She was starving for kindness, and he was the only feast she had ever known. Her internal war came to a head on a Tuesday afternoon. Nora had gone to the general store to buy thread. She was trying to repair an old dress, a small act of defiance to reclaim something of her former self. As she stepped out of the store, clutching her small parcel, she found her path blocked. Mrs. Gable, the banker's wife, stood there with 3 other women from the church auxiliary. They were dressed in severe calico, their bonnets tied tight under their chins. They looked like a wall of judgment. Excuse me, Nora murmured, trying to step around them. Mrs. Gable moved to block her. We saw you. Nora Hayes. Nora froze. Saw me what? We see the way you look at that drifter, one of the other women hissed. That man who works for the widow Klein. Trapping another man won't save you. Nora! Mrs. Gable said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet concern that was far worse than shouting. You think because a stranger pays you mind, you can wash off the stain? You can't. He is just a man buying a meal, Nora said, her voice shaking. He is a man you are going to drag down into the mud with you. Mrs. Gable said, just like you do with everything you touch. Leave him be. Hasn't there been enough sin on your account? Nora felt the blood drain from her face. The injustice of it, the sheer, suffocating weight of their hypocrisy, stole her breath. These were the women who had turned their backs when she was bleeding. These were the mothers of the boys who had hurt her. She wanted to scream. She wanted to strike out. But she did nothing. She lowered her head. The shame conditioned into her like a reflex, and pushed past them. "We are praying for you, Mrs." Gable called after her, the words landing like stones thrown at her back. Nora fled to the saloon. It was empty, the afternoon lull before the evening rush. She didn't go to her room. She went straight to the bar, poured herself a glass of the cheap whiskey usually reserved for the drovers, and sat in the darkest corner of the room. She drank it in one burning gulp. She poured another. She was trying to numb the voice of Mrs. Gable in her head, trapping another man, dragging him down. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't hear the boots on the floorboards. She only realized she wasn't alone when a hand gently moved the whiskey bottle away from her reach. She looked up, her eyes swimming with unshed tears and alcohol. Cole stood there. He looked dusty and tired, smelling of the wind. Without a word, he sat down in the chair next to her. He didn't lecture her. He didn't look at her with pity. He simply took the glass from her hand, set it aside, and poured water from a pitcher on the table into a clean mug. He slid the water toward her. "Drink," he said softly. Nora stared at the water. Her throat felt tight. "Why do you bother?" she whispered. "You should listen to them. Everyone says I am poison. I don't listen to everyone," Cole said. "I listen to what I see." He took a sip of his own coffee, looking straight ahead. Nora took the water. The coolness of the tin cup grounded her. "I used to be a seamstress," she said suddenly. The words just fell out. "I was good at it. I could look at a bolt of cloth and see the dress inside it before I even cut the pattern. My father, he was a saddle maker. He taught me to work with my hands." She looked at her hands now, roughened by scrubbing bar tops and washing glasses. He died when a horse kicked him. She continued, "It was quick. I thought that was the worst thing that could happen to me." "Being alone?" She laughed, a brittle sound. "I didn't know anything then." Cole was silent for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice low, matching her confession with one of his own. "I grew up in Texas," he said. "My father ranched. I didn't have the patience for cows back then. I was good with a gun. Too good. I thought it made me a man." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I worked as a scout, then a guard. Then, whatever paid, I ended up in a place where a man named Thorne ran everything. He had a younger brother, a cruel boy. He liked to hurt things, dogs, horses, women." Nora looked at him, her breath catching. "One night, the brother went too far with a girl who worked in the kitchens," Cole said, his jaw tightening. "I stopped him. He didn't like that. He called me out. He thought his name would make my aim shake." Cole looked at Nora, his blue eyes dark with memory. "It didn't. I put him in the ground. It was fair. It was face to face. But the family, they owned the judge, the sheriff, the paper. By the next morning, I was a cold-blooded murderer who shot a boy in the back." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled wanted poster. He smoothed it out on the table between them. "This is who they say I am," he said. Nora looked at the sketch. She looked at the man beside her. She saw the weary set of his shoulders, the gentleness in his hands that belied the violence he was capable of. "They are liars," she whispered. "We are both judged for things we didn't choose," Cole said. He folded the paper and put it away. "But that doesn't make their stories true. Nora." The bond between them snapped into place then, solid and undeniable. It was forged in the fire of their shared exclusion. They were two shipwrecks on the same shore. Cole reached out and rested his hand on the table, palm up. It was an invitation, not a demand. Nora looked at it. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His skin was rough, calloused, and warm. They sat there, shoulders touching, while the piano player began to plink out a tune in the front of the room and the laughter of the evening crowd began to swell. But in their corner, there was only quiet understanding. The moon was a pale sliver when Cole walked her home that night. The saloon owner, A man named Higgins, who usually guarded his girls like livestock, had watched them leave with a frown but hadn't stopped them. There was something about the look in Cole's eye that made men think twice about interfering. They walked slowly. The wind had died down, leaving the air crisp and still. "The West is big," Cole said quietly as they walked past the darkened church. "You can ride for weeks and not see a soul. It can swallow a man whole. Sometimes I think that is what I want, to just disappear into it." "Is it?" Nora asked. "It was," Cole admitted, "until lately." They reached the door of the boarding house. It was in the shadows, hidden from the street. Nora turned to face him. She felt a trembling start in her legs, a mixture of the cold and a terrifying, wonderful nervous energy. "Thank you," she said, "for walking you." "No," she said, "for treating me like I am worth something. For not looking away." Cole took off his hat, holding it in front of him. "You are worth more than this town knows." "Nora." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden. She took a step closer to him. The desire to be held, to be comforted, was an ache in her chest so strong it was almost physical. She leaned in, her face tilting up toward his. Cole stood still, letting her set the pace. She moved closer, her lips parting slightly. But just as she was inches away, a memory flashed, the smell of whiskey, the rough hand, the feeling of being trapped. She flinched violently, pulling back with a sharp gasp, her hands coming up to protect her chest. "I'm sorry," she stammered, backing against the door. "I can't. Cole didn't move forward. He didn't get angry. He didn't reach for her. He stayed exactly where he was, a steady anchor in her storm. "It is all right," he said softly. His voice was a balm. "Nora, look at me." She looked up, her breathing ragged. "I am not him," Cole said. "And I am not them. I will never take anything from you that you don't freely give. Not a kiss, not a touch, nothing. You have the say. Always." Nora looked at him, and the panic began to recede, replaced by a profound gratitude. He was giving her back the one thing that had been stolen. Her choice. She stepped forward again, shaky but determined. She didn't try to kiss him this time. Instead, she stepped right up to him and pressed her forehead against his chest. She trembled against him. "I am terrified," she whispered into his coat. "I am so scared of being touched, but I want to be close to you. I ache for it." Cole dropped his hat to the ground, slowly, with infinite care. He raised his arms and wrapped them around her. He didn't squeeze, he just created a circle of safety around her. He held her while she shook. He held her until the shaking stopped and she just leaned into him, breathing in the scent of him, soap and sage and man. For a minute, maybe two, she let herself feel safe. Then she pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Good night, Cole. Good night, Nora." She slipped inside and locked the door. Upstairs, alone in her room, Nora did not sleep immediately. She lay in the dark, replaying the sensation of his arms around her. It wasn't a cure. The scars were still there. But for the first time in 3 years, she felt a fragile, green shoot of hope pushing up through the scorched earth of her heart. 5 miles out of town, the main house of the Claiborne Ranch blazed with light. Ezra Claiborne sat in his study, a room dominated by the mounted head of a buffalo and shelves of leather-bound ledgers. He was a large man, his bulk running to fat now, but with the hard, ruthless eyes of a predator. Deputy Travis stood before the desk, hat in hand, looking small. "So," Claiborne said, his voice a deep rumble. "A drifter." "Yes, sir," Travis said. "Name of Cole. Working out at the Widow Klein's place. He laid hands on me. Mr. Claiborne. Disrespected the law. I don't care about your pride." "Travis," Claiborne snapped. "I care that a stranger is walking around my town acting like he has a spine. Men with spines are dangerous. They give other people ideas. He seems close with the Hayes girl," Travis added, sensing his boss's mood. "Does he now?" Claiborne leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking. "That girl is a loose end I should have cut years ago." He picked up a cigar and lit it, the smoke curling up toward the ceiling. "Keep an eye on him. Travis, Find out who he is, where he comes from. If he steps out of line, even an inch, you let me know. We don't need heroes in Silver Creek. We need order." Travis nodded, a cruel smile touching his bruised lips. "Yes, sir." The wind outside began to pick up again, moaning around the eaves of the ranch house. Back in town, Nora stood at her small window. She looked out toward the horizon, where the stars were being blotted out by a rising darkness. A dust storm was rolling in from the plains. She could see the wall of earth and wind moving toward them, a giant, swirling bruise against the night sky. It was coming to swallow everything, the town, the ranch, the tiny flicker of hope she had just found. She pressed her hand against the cold glass. She wondered if love, fragile and new as it was, could possibly survive in a place that seemed determined to grind everything beautiful into dust. Tomorrow would bring the storm. But for tonight, she held the memory of his arms, and that was the only shelter she had. The weeks that followed settled over the town of Silver Creek like dust settling after a stampede. Slow, gritty, and inevitable. May turned toward June, and the high desert heat began to assert itself, baking the earth until it cracked in geometric patterns of thirst. Cole Maddox and Nora Hayes fell into a rhythm that was as steady as the heartbeat of the land itself. For Cole, the days were long stretches of physical labor out at the Widow Klein's ranch. He mended fences that had been neglected for a decade, wrestling with cedar posts and rusted wire until his gloves were shredded. He drove the widow's thin cattle up toward the higher mesas where the grass was still green, sitting in the saddle for 10 hours at a time with only the wind and the circling hawks for company. But the hardness of the day made the evening sweet, every night, just as the sun began to dip below the western ridge, turning the sky into a bruised canvas of purple and iron gray. Cole would ride into town. He would stable the bay horse, wash the worst of the grime from his face and hands at the trough, and walk to the saloon. Nora began to live for the sound of the door hinges. She would be wiping down the mahogany bar or carrying a tray of empty glasses, her back aching and her feet swollen. But the moment she saw his silhouette against the twilight in the doorway, the exhaustion would recede. Her heart, which for so long had been a heavy, stone-like thing in her chest, would give a strange, fluttering skip. They did not sit together immediately. They were careful. Cole would take his usual table in the back corner, the one where the shadows were deepest. Nora would work her shift, dodging the grasping hands of the miners and the cattlemen, serving whiskey and bad beer, but her orbit always brought her back to him. In the lull between the dinner rush and the late-night gambling, she would slip into the chair beside him. Their conversations started small, built on the scaffolding of safe topics, the weather, the cattle, the price of flour. But as the days turned into weeks, the walls began to come down, brick by cautious brick. "I used to dream of a house," Nora said one evening, tracing the rim of her water glass with a rough fingertip. "Not a big one, just 4 walls that were mine, white curtains in the windows, and a garden out back where I could grow things that weren't just sagebrush." She looked up at him, a self-conscious smile touching her lips. "It sounds foolish now. A garden in this dust." "It does not sound foolish," Cole said. His voice was low, a rumble that vibrated in the small space between them. "It sounds like something worth wanting." "I don't know if I can want things anymore," Nora admitted softly. "Wanting feels dangerous, like I'm asking the world to take something else away." Cole nodded slowly. He understood that. He understood it down to his marrow. "I never thought I would stop moving," he confessed. "For 5 years, I haven't slept in the same bed for more than a month. I thought if I stopped, the quiet would catch up to me, and I don't believe I deserve peace. Nora, not after the things I have done. You deserve to rest." "Cole," she said fiercely. "Everyone does." He looked at her then, his blue eyes searching her face. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe some of us are just meant to keep watch while others sleep." The fragile peace of their evenings was shattered on a Tuesday. The saloon was busier than usual, filled with the noise of a dozen conversations and the clinking of chips. Then, the bat-wing doors swung open, not with a creak, but with a slam. Silence rippled through the room, starting at the door and spreading outward until even the piano player lifted his hands from the keys. Ezra Claiborne stood in the entrance. He was a man who took up space, not just with his physical bulk, which was considerable, but with the weight of his influence. He wore a suit of dark broadcloth that was too warm for the season, a gold watch chain gleaming across his vest. His face was a map of indulgences, red-veined cheeks, a heavy jaw, but his eyes were cold, hard pebbles of gray flint. He walked into the room, his spurs chiming softly on the floorboards. Two of his hired men trailed behind him like shadows. Claiborne went to the high-stakes poker table in the center of the room. A miner hurriedly vacated a chair, and Claiborne sat. He did not look at the cards. He looked around the room, his gaze sweeping over the patrons like a landlord inspecting his property. His eyes stopped on Nora. She was standing near the bar, holding a pitcher of beer. She felt his gaze like a physical touch, a cold finger running down her spine. She stiffened, but she did not look away. She had learned that looking away from a predator only triggered the instinct to chase. "Girl," Claiborne called out. "Bring a bottle of the good stuff, and a clean glass." Nora walked over to the table, her movement stiff. She set the bottle and the glass down. Claiborne's hands shot out, not to grab her, but to rest heavily on her wrist. Pinning her hand to the table, the room held its breath. "You are looking well." "Nora," Claiborne said. His voice was smooth, oily, better than usual. "I hear you have found yourself a guardian angel." Nora pulled her hand back. Claiborne let her go, a smirk playing on his lips. "I don't know what you mean, Mr. Claiborne," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her knees. "Don't you?" He poured the whiskey. The amber liquid glugging into the glass? "That drifter, the one working for the widow. Travis tells me he has a habit of sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. He is just a customer." Nora lied. Claiborne took a sip of the whiskey, watching her over the rim of the glass. "Be careful. Nora, men with pasts like his, they bring storms with them. And when the lightning strikes, it usually hits the thing standing closest to them." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menace that only she could hear. "You are already damaged goods. Girl, don't make yourself a target." "Two." Nora backed away, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She retreated to the bar, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the wood to steady them. She looked toward the back corner. Cole was there. He was watching Claiborne with a stillness that was terrifying. His hand was nowhere near his gun, but the tension in his shoulders was like a coiled spring. He had heard, or at least he had seen. Nora realized then, with a sickening jolt, that this wasn't just about her reputation anymore. Claiborne wasn't just mocking her. He was threatening Cole. And in this town, a threat from Ezra Claiborne was as good as a death warrant. Later that night, the moon was a sliver of bone in the sky. Nora waited in the alley behind the saloon, pacing back and forth in the dust. The smell of rotting vegetable scraps and stale beer was heavy in the air, but she hardly noticed. When the back door opened and Cole stepped out, she turned on him instantly. "What did he mean?" she demanded, her voice a harsh whisper. Cole stopped. He adjusted his hat, his face in shadow. "He was just trying to scare you." "Nora, he said men with pasts bring storms," she said, stepping closer. "He looked right at you when he said it. He knows something." "Cole, what does he know?" Cole looked away, down the length of the empty alley. "I told you I had enemies." "That is not enough anymore," Nora said. She reached out and grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into the canvas of his coat. "If you are going to be in my life, if you are going to stand beside me while the whole town watches, I need to know what they are looking at. I need to know who you are." Cole sighed, a sound that seemed to come from the bottom of a deep well. He looked at her, seeing the fear and the defiance in her eyes. She was right. He couldn't protect her with lies. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out the folded, crumpled piece of paper he had torn from the sheriff's wall weeks ago. He handed it to her. Nora took it. She moved to where a shaft of moonlight cut through the darkness. She unfolded the paper, smoothing it against her palm. The sketch was crude, but the likeness was undeniable. The scar, the eyes, wanted for murder. The text read, Elias Thorne, $500 bounty. Nora felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. Murder. She looked up at him, the paper crinkled in her hand. You killed a man? Cole did not flinch. He did not try to soften it. Yes. She stared at him. The man who had held her while she cried. The man who folded his coat on her chair. Who was he? She asked. His name was Elias Thorne, a rancher's brother, down in New Mexico. Cole said, he was a man who liked pain. He used a whip on his horses and his hands on the women who worked the kitchens. Cole stepped closer, his voice hard with the memory. I was working security for the ranch. I saw him corner a girl not much older than you were when... He stopped, seeing the recognition in Nora's eyes. I stopped him. Cole continued. I broke his jaw. He didn't like that. He waited for me outside the bunkhouse the next morning. He had a gun. He told me to draw. Cole paused, looking at his own hands. It was him or me. Nora. I drew faster. I put a bullet in his chest. It was a fair fight, but his brother ran the county. By noon, the sheriff had signed a warrant saying I shot him in the back, saying I murdered an innocent boy. He gestured to the poster in her hand. That paper is a lie. But the bullet wasn't. Nora looked down at the poster again. She looked at the words, wanted for murder. She thought of the night 3 years ago. She thought of Sheriff Harlan sitting behind his desk, telling her that the Claiborne boy and his friends were good stock, and that she was a liar. She thought of how the truth had been twisted, reshaped until the victim became the villain and the monsters became the heroes. She looked at Cole. She didn't see a killer. She saw a man who had stood between a bully and a victim, and who had paid the price for it ever since. She saw herself, slowly, deliberately. Nora folded the paper. She walked over to Cole and tucked it back into his pocket, patting his chest over his heart. The law out here? She said quietly, her voice trembling with a sudden, fierce clarity. Is just a fence the rich men build to keep the rest of us out? Cole let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. You believe me? I believe you, Nora said, because I know what it looks like when the powerful rewrite the story. Cole reached out and took her hand. His grip was strong, desperate. Thank you, Nora squeezed his hand back, but Claiborne knows. She said, that is what he meant. He knows there's a price on your head. Then I will have to be careful, Cole said. Careful isn't enough, Nora whispered, but she didn't pull her hand away. 2 nights later, the air was cool and crisp, a respite from the sweltering heat of the day. The saloon was slow, the midweek lull leaving the room half empty. Higgins, the owner, was in a rare good mood after winning a pot at cards, and he waved Nora off early. Go on, he grunted. You are moping around here like a funeral procession. Get some air. Nora didn't need to be told twice. She found Cole at his table and signaled him with a tilt of her head. They left separately, meeting by the livery stable where Cole's horse was boarded, without a word. Cole saddled the bay. He mounted and then reached a hand down to Nora. Trust me, he asked. Always, she said. She took his hand and swung up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. The horse shifted under the added weight, but Cole steadied him with a murmur. They rode out of town, leaving the lights of Silver Creek behind. They rode west, toward the foothills where the land began to wrinkle and rise. The silence of the desert was vast, broken only by the rhythmic thud of hooves and the wind sighing through the scrub brush. Nora rested her cheek against Cole's back. She could feel the heat of him through his coat, the shift of his muscles as he guided the horse. It was an intimacy she had not allowed herself to imagine. Being this close, this connected to a man. They stopped at a small depression near a dry wash, sheltered by a stand of twisted cottonwood trees. Cole dismounted and helped her down. His hands lingered on her waist for a fraction of a second longer than necessary before he let go. He gathered dried wood and built a small fire. The flames crackled. sending sparks drifting up toward the canopy of stars that stretched endlessly above them. The Milky Way was a smear of diamond dust across the black. They sat on his bedroll, sharing a wool blanket against the chill. The firelight danced on their faces, softening the lines of worry. Nora watched the flames. Her heart was beating fast, a nervous rhythm that was part fear, part anticipation. "I used to love the night," she said softly. "Before. Now. The dark always feels like it is hiding something." Cole poked the fire with a stick. "You are safe here, Nora, I promise you that." "I know," she said. She turned to look at him. The firelight caught the scar on his jaw, turning it into a silver line. She took a deep breath. She was tired of being afraid. She was tired of her body being a site of trauma, a locked room she was afraid to enter. She wanted to reclaim it. She wanted to give it to someone who saw her, not just as a body, but as a soul. She shifted on the blanket, turning to face him fully. "Cole," she whispered. He looked at her, and the hunger in his eyes was raw, but he didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees. "My body," Nora started, her voice shaking. "It remembers things I want to forget. Sometimes, when I think about being touched, my skin goes cold. I freeze. I understand," Cole said gently. "We don't have to do anything. We can just sit here." "No," Nora said. Her voice was stronger now. "I don't want to just sit here. I don't want them to take this from me. I want to choose." She reached out. Her hand trembled in the air for a moment before she laid her fingers against his cheek. His skin was rough with stubble, warm and alive. Cole closed his eyes at her touch, leaning into her hand. He let out a ragged breath. Nora traced the line of his jaw, her thumb brushing over the scar. She moved closer. She could smell the soap he used, the scent of leather and smoke. "I am going to kiss you," she whispered. Cole opened his eyes. They were dark, intense. "If you want to, I want to." She leaned in. It was a slow movement, giving herself a dozen chances to stop, to pull back. But she didn't. She closed the distance and pressed her lips to his. It was a soft kiss, tentative and questioning. Cole responded with a gentleness that broke her heart. He didn't grab her. He didn't push. He simply met her, his lips warm and firm against hers. Nora pulled back an inch, searching his face. He was waiting for her. He was giving her the reins. She kissed him again, deeper this time. She felt a spark of heat in her belly, a flicker of desire that had nothing to do with fear. She brought her other hand up to tangle in the hair at the nape of his neck. Cole groaned low in his throat, his hands coming up to cup her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "Is this all right?" he murmured against her lips. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes." They moved slowly, with the reverence of a ritual. Nora led the way, discovering that her fear was there, yes, but it was smaller than her need. Every time she flinched, even slightly, Cole stopped instantly, waiting until she nodded, until she pulled him back, under the vast, indifferent sky, on a rough blanket spread over the hard earth. Nora Hayes took herself back. When they finally lay together, skin against skin, the act was not a taking, but a giving. It was a conversation without words. It was tears on her cheeks that Cole kissed away. It was the feeling of his heavy weight grounding her, not crushing her. It was a reclamation. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the blanket, the fire burning down to glowing red embers. The coyotes were singing in the distance, a lonely, yipping chorus. Nora rested her head on Cole's shoulder, her hand flat against his chest. She felt exhausted, but it was a good exhaustion, clean and deep. "Cole," she whispered. I feel light." She sounded surprised. "I feel like I put a heavy sack down that I've been carrying for 3 years. It isn't shame, Cole. It is joy. I think it is joy." Cole tightened his arm around her, pulling her closer. "I'm glad, Nora." But as he held her, looking up at the stars, Cole felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his own gut. He had touched something sacred tonight. He had been given a gift he didn't deserve. And now, The terror of losing it was almost paralyzing. Claiborne knew. The bounty was real. The men in town were watching. By bringing Nora this close, by loving her, he had placed her squarely in the path of the storm Claiborne had promised. He kissed the top of her head, inhaling the scent of her hair. "I won't let anything happen to you," he swore silently, "even if I have to die to stop it." The sun rose with a vengeance the next morning, bleaching the color out of the sky before it was even fully light. Cole and Nora rode back into town just as the rooster at the livery stable was crowing. They tried to be discreet, Nora slipping off the horse at the edge of town and walking the rest of the way. But in a place like Silver Creek, eyes were always watching. Mrs. Gable saw them. She was shaking out a rug on her porch. She stopped, her mouth pressing into a thin line as she watched Nora walk down the street, her hair slightly disheveled, a look of quiet, secret happiness on her face. By noon, the Whisper network was buzzing. "Did you see her?" "Walking in at dawn," snared him. "She did, just like we said. That drifter won't last long. Trouble follows that girl like a shadow." Cole felt the change in the atmosphere when he walked into the saloon that evening. The silence was sharper. The glances were not just wary now. They were predatory. He went to the bar to order a beer. 2 men were standing there, strangers, with the dusty, hard-worn look of hired guns. They wore their holsters tied low. One of them, a man with a missing tooth and a lazy eye, turned to Cole. "You are the one they call Cole, ain't you?" the man asked. Cole kept his eyes on the mirror behind the bar. "I am. Heard you might be worth something," the man said, grinning. "Heard there is paper on a man looking just like you. $500 is a lot of money for a day's work." Cole turned slowly to face them. He let his coat fall open slightly, revealing the handle of his Colt. "Money is no good to a dead man," Cole said softly. The man's grin faltered. He looked at Cole's eyes and saw the death living there. He cleared his throat and took a step back. "Just talking, friend, just talking. But you know, if I was a man with a price on my head, I wouldn't be planting roots. The ground here is mighty hard to dig graves in." The men finished their drinks and walked out, their spurs clinking. Cole watched them go. His hand was steady, but his heart was racing. It was starting. The probing, the threats, they were testing him. Soon, they would stop talking and start shooting. He looked over at Nora. She was across the room, wiping down a table. She looked up and met his gaze. She saw the tension in his frame, and her smile faded. Cole realized then that he couldn't stay. Not like this. If he stayed, he would have to kill these men, and then more would come, and eventually, a stray bullet would find Nora, or Claiborne would decide to hurt her just to get to him. He had to leave. The thought was a physical pain. He looked at Nora, at the curve of her neck, the strength in her hands, and the idea of riding away alone was unbearable. But what was the alternative? Later, on the small wooden balcony on the second floor of the saloon, Nora stood watching the sunset. The sky was a violent wash of blood red and gold, beautiful and threatening. Cole stepped out behind her. The boards creaked under his boots. "They know," Cole said without preamble. "Claiborne's men. They asked me about the bounty." Nora turned to him. Her face was pale in the dying light. "What did you say?" "I told them to back off, but they won't, not for long. $500 makes men brave." He moved to the railing, gripping it with both hands. "I have to leave. Nora, I can't stay here. If I stay, blood is going to spill, and I won't risk it splashing on you." Nora felt a wave of nausea. The fear she had pushed aside the night before came rushing back, crashing over her. "Leave?" she whispered. "I am thinking about heading north," Cole said, not looking at her. "Toward the Wyoming territory. There is land up there, valleys where no one cares who you were, only what you can build." He turned to her then, and the vulnerability in his face broke her heart. "Come with me." Nora stared at him. The words hung in the air, glittering like gold dust. Come with me. It was the dream she hadn't dared to dream. To leave Silver Creek, to leave the shame, The whispers, the ghosts of the men who had hurt her, to be with him. But then, another thought crowded in, dark and heavy. She looked at the wanted poster in her mind. She saw the men in the bar. She heard Mrs. Gable's voice, trapping another man, dragging him down. If she went with him, she would slow him down. She would be a burden, a wagon, a dress, a woman who needed protecting. These things would get him killed. A lone rider could disappear. A man with a woman was a target. But if he stayed, he died. I don't know, she stammered. Cole, if I go with you, I will just be another thing you have to defend. You are the only thing I want to defend, Cole said fiercely. He reached out and took her hand. Think about it. Please, we can't stay here. This town wants to eat us alive. He squeezed her hand, then let go. I will wait for your answer. He walked back inside, leaving her alone on the balcony. Nora turned back to the sunset. The red light washed over her, staining her dress, her hands. She closed her eyes. She loved him. She loved him with a terrifying, desperate intensity that she hadn't known she was capable of. But was loving him enough to save him? Or would loving him be the very thing that destroyed him? She stood there as the sun vanished and the dark came rushing in, torn in half by the terrible weight of hope and fear. The plan began to take shape in the quiet, stolen moments between the rising of the sun and the setting of the moon. It was a fragile thing, constructed of whispers and desperate hope, mapped out on the dirt floor of the Widow Klein's barn, where Cole sketched rivers and mountain ranges with the toe of his boot. He spoke to Mrs. Klein first, approaching her as she churned butter on the back porch, her arms corded with a muscle that belied her age. I need 2 horses, Cole said, leaning against the railing. Not for work. To keep. The widow did not stop the rhythmic motion of the churn. She looked out over the dry scrub of her land, her eyes narrowing against the glare. You are moving on. Then, I have to, Cole said. The wind is changing. She nodded slowly. I have an old roan mare. She is not fast, but she is steady, and she will walk until her heart bursts if you ask her to. And your bay, I will sell them to you for $20. It is less than they are worth, but more than I have right now. Cole paid her from the small roll of bills he kept hidden in his boot lining. It left him with almost nothing, but it gave him the means to move. That evening, he laid it out for Nora. They sat in the shadows of the livery stable, the only place where they could speak without the prying eyes of the saloon patrons. There is a valley up north, Cole said, his voice low and urgent. Near the Wyoming line, a man at the mercantile told me about it. He said there is water that runs all year, and the timber is thick enough to build a cabin in a week. Nora listened, her hands twisting the fabric of her apron. We could build something. Nora, Cole continued, and for the first time, there was a light in his eyes that wasn't just survival. A cabin, a coop for chickens. You wouldn't have to pour whiskey for men who don't know your name. You could sew again. You could make things that are beautiful. Nora closed her eyes, letting the image wash over her. A cabin. The smell of fresh sawdust instead of stale tobacco. Chickens scratching in the yard. It sounded like heaven. It sounded like a dream she had buried in the same grave as her father. But then the cold reality of their lives rushed back in. With what money? Cole? She asked, her voice trembling. We have nothing. Winter is coming. If we go out there and the snows hit before we are ready, we will starve. Or freeze. We will hunt, Cole said. I can trap. And what if we are just trading one kind of misery for another? Nora asked. At least here I know the shape of the danger. Out there, it is just empty. Cole took her hands in his. His grip was warm and rough. The world is hard everywhere. Nora, but out there, it would be our hardship. Not Claiborne's, not the town's, ours. Nora looked at him, torn between the terrifying pull of the unknown and the suffocating weight of the familiar. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to scream yes. But fear was a habit she had practiced for 3 years, and it did not break easily. I need time, she whispered. Just a little more time. But time was the one thing they did not have. Ezra Claiborne was not a man who waited for problems to resolve themselves. He was a man who removed obstacles, usually with a checkbook or a bullet. The presence of Cole Maddox, a man who had humiliated his deputy and was winning the heart of the woman Claiborne enjoyed seeing broken, was an insult he would not tolerate. 2 days after Cole bought the horses, he was riding the North Ridge with 2 other hands from the Klein Ranch. One was a young boy named Silas, barely 18, with a face full of freckles and a laugh that was too loud. The other was an older, silent man named Miller. They were checking for strays in a landscape of broken rock and scrub oak. The heat was a physical weight, pressing down on their hats. Cole rode point, his eyes scanning the horizon. He felt the trouble before he heard it. It was a silence in the brush, a lack of movement where there should have been birds. "Get down," Cole shouted, wheeling his horse around. The crack of a rifle shattered the afternoon. It came from the ridge above them, a puff of white smoke against the blue sky. Silas didn't even have time to scream. The bullet caught him in the chest, knocking him backward out of his saddle. He hit the dust with a heavy, final thud. Miller's horse reared, screaming in panic. Cole drew his Colt, spurring the bay toward the cover of a large boulder. He saw the glint of metal on the ridge. 3 men, maybe 4, positioned behind the rocks. They were pinned down. Another shot rang out, kicking up dirt inches from Cole's boot. A third shot whined through the air and tore through the meat of Cole's left shoulder. The impact was like being hit with a sledgehammer. Cole gritted his teeth, a white-hot agony radiating down his arm. But he didn't drop his gun. He couldn't. "Miller!" Cole roared. "Get behind the rocks." Miller scrambled off his horse and dove for cover. Cole ignored the blood soaking his shirt. He focused on the ridge. He knew these men, not their names, but their type. Hired guns. They were confident because they had the high ground, but they were sloppy. They were shooting too fast, wasting ammunition. Cole waited. He controlled his breathing, forcing the pain into a small, tight box in the back of his mind. He saw a hat rise above the rocks. Cole fired. The hat flew off, and a man yelled in pain, falling back out of sight. "They are moving to flank us," Miller shouted, pointing to the left where dust was rising. Cole knew they couldn't stay. If they were surrounded, they were dead. "Ride," Cole yelled. "Ride for the canyon." He laid down a suppressing fire, thumbing the hammer of his Colt with a speed born of 1,000 practice draws. He put 3 shots into the rocks, forcing the attackers to keep their heads down. With his good arm, he grabbed the reins of his terrified horse and swung into the saddle. The movement tore at his shoulder, sending black spots dancing across his vision, but he stayed mounted. He and Miller galloped toward the narrow mouth of the canyon, leaving Silas's body in the dust. The hired guns fired after them, bullets buzzing like angry hornets. But the distance was growing. They rode hard for 5 miles, not stopping until the horses were lathered and blowing. Cole swayed in the saddle, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side, blood dripping from his fingertips to mark their trail in the sand. When they reached the ranch, Mrs. Klein was waiting on the porch. She saw the empty saddle on Silas's horse, and her face went gray. But she didn't scream. She was a woman of the frontier. She had buried a husband and 2 sons. She knew that grief was a luxury for later. "Get him inside," she ordered Miller, pointing at Cole. They half-carried Cole into the kitchen and laid him on the sturdy wooden table. The world was tilting around him, gray and fuzzy at the edges. Mrs. Klein cut his shirt away with a pair of shears. The wound was ugly. A hole punched through the muscle of his shoulder, but the bullet had passed clean through. It missed the bone. She said, her voice steady, "But he has lost a lot of blood." She poured whiskey into the wound. The pain was absolute. A blinding white flash that made Cole arch his back and cry out through clenched teeth. Then came the needle. News traveled faster than a horse in Silver Creek. Nora was polishing glasses when the stable boy burst into the saloon, his chest heaving. "They shot them!" the boy yelled to anyone who would listen. "Out on the North Ridge. Silas is dead. They say the drifter is done for." Nora dropped the glass she was holding. It shattered on the floor, a sound that seemed to happen miles away. She didn't ask permission. She didn't take off her apron. She ran out the door, ignoring Higgins shouting after her. She ran to the livery stable. Saddle a horse, she commanded the boy, her voice a whip-crack of authority she didn't know she possessed. Now! She rode out of town at a gallop, her skirts bunching around her legs, her hair flying loose from its pins. The wind stung her eyes, making them water. But she didn't blink. She rode with a single-minded desperation, chanting a silent prayer to a God she hadn't spoken to in years. Please, not him. Take anything else, but not him. When she arrived at the ranch, the sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the yard. She threw the reins to Miller and ran into the house. The kitchen smelled of copper and whiskey and sweat. Cole was lying on the table, a mound of bloody rags on the floor beside him. He was pale, his skin the color of old parchment, and his eyes were closed. Is he? Nora choked out. He is alive. Mrs. Klein said. She was washing her hands in a basin, the water turning pink. The fever is coming on him now. Tonight will decide it. Nora walked to the table. She reached out and touched Cole's forehead. It was burning hot. I will stay with him, Nora said. Mrs. Klein looked at her, seeing the fierce, terrifying love in the younger woman's face. She nodded. There is water in the bucket. Keep him cool. If he starts to thrash, hold him down. The night that followed was a descent into hell. The wind picked up outside, scraping the branches of a cottonwood tree against the roof like skeletal fingers trying to pry the shingles loose. Inside, the only light came from a single lantern turned low. Cole tossed and turned, his body fighting the infection that sought to take hold. He muttered in his sleep, words that were slurred and disjointed. Elias? No, don't do it. Nora sat beside him, wringing out a cloth in cool water and pressing it to his brow. She held his good hand, squeezing it every time he cried out, I didn't mean to. Cole gasped, his eyes flying open but seeing nothing. His gaze was fixed on a ghost in the corner of the room. Tell his mother, I didn't want to kill him. Shh, Nora whispered, brushing the damp hair back from his forehead. It is over. Cole, you are safe. He is dead. Cole moaned, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. I can still see his face. He looks surprised. Why does he look surprised? Nora listened, her heart breaking. She realized then how deep the wound went. It wasn't just the bullet in his shoulder. It was the guilt he carried, a festering sore that had never been allowed to heal. He was a good man forced to do a terrible thing, and he had never forgiven himself for surviving. I forgive you, Nora whispered into the darkness. Cole, listen to me. I forgive you. You are not a monster. You are the man who saved me. She stayed there through the darkest hours, when the wind howled like a banshee and the house creaked and groaned. She didn't sleep. She just held on to him, acting as the anchor that kept him from drifting away into the dark. Dawn broke gray and still. The wind had died down, leaving a silence so profound it rang in the ears. Nora had fallen asleep with her head resting on Cole's uninjured arm. She woke with a start, her neck stiff, her mouth dry. She sat up and looked at him. Cole's eyes were open. They were clear. The fever had broken. He was looking at her with a mixture of confusion and wonder. Nora, he rasped. His voice was like sandpaper. You idiot, Nora said, her voice cracking. She burst into tears. You absolute idiot. You nearly died. Cole tried to smile, but it was more of a grimace. I seem to have a habit of almost dying. Don't you dare joke, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Don't you dare. Cole reached out with his good hand and touched her arm. I am here. Nora, I am still here. I don't know how to do this without you, she confessed, the words rushing out of her. I don't know how to live in a world where you aren't breathing. I thought, all night, I thought. She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears and exhaustion. I love you, Cole Maddox, and I hate you for making me this afraid. Cole looked at her, and the expression on his face was one of pure, unadulterated awe. He had spent his life believing he was broken, destined to be alone. And here was this woman, this survivor, pouring her heart out over his blood-stained shirt. "I love you," he whispered back. "More than I thought I could love anything." They sat there for a moment in the quiet of the morning, the truth of it hanging in the air between them. But reality was waiting at the door. "We can't stay," Cole said, his voice hardening. "I know," Nora said. "Claiborne won't stop. He killed Silas. He tried to kill me. Next time, he will send more men. If we stay here, we die." "Then we go," Nora said. Her voice was firm now. The fear was still there, but the indecision was gone. "Now?" Cole asked. "Now," she said, "before he finds out you are still alive." They packed with the frantic efficiency of people who knew the house was burning down. Mrs. Klein gave them a sack of cornmeal, some dried beef, and a canteen. "Take the horses," she said. "Go north. Stay off the main road." Nora did not go back to her room above the saloon. She had nothing there that mattered. The dresses she had worn to serve drinks, the corset that pinched her ribs, the shoes with the worn heels. She left them all behind. They belonged to a woman she was no longer. She wore a set of boys' clothes Mrs. Klein found in a trunk, trousers and a heavy flannel shirt. They were too big, but they were practical. She tied her hair back with a strip of leather. Cole mounted the roan mare, his shoulder heavily bandaged and his arm in a sling. Nora rode the bay. They rode out of the ranch gate just as the sun cleared the horizon, turning the world into a furnace. They didn't look back at the town of Silver Creek. They looked ahead, to the vast, shimmering emptiness of the plateau. The journey began in silence. The pain in Cole's shoulder was a constant throb, riding with him like a passenger. But he focused on the horizon. By midday, the heat was brutal. The land here was unforgiving, an expanse of dry gullies and scrub brush that offered no shade. The mountains they were aiming for were purple shadows in the distance, looking impossibly far away. "We have to keep moving," Cole said, his face pale with strain. "Claiborne will have a posse out by now." He was right. Back in town, Travis had found the blood on the trail. He had ridden back to Claiborne, and within the hour, 6 men were mounted up. They carried long rifles and enough water for 3 days. They weren't lawmen anymore. They were hunters. On the second day, the weather turned against them. The sky to the west turned a sickly yellow-green. The wind picked up, not the usual gusting breeze, but a steady, roaring force that lifted the top layer of the earth and hurled it into the air. "Dust storm!" Cole shouted over the roar. They couldn't see more than 5 feet in front of them. The world became a swirling vortex of grit that clogged their noses and stung their skin like sandpaper. The horses panicked, fighting the bits, turning their hindquarters into the wind. "We need shelter," Nora yelled, pulling her scarf up over her nose. Cole spotted a rocky overhang near the base of a mesa, a shallow cave carved by wind and water. He guided them toward it. They huddled under the rock, forcing the horses down to their knees. The dust screamed past the opening, a brown wall of suffocation. They couldn't speak. Opening their mouths meant choking on dirt. They just huddled together, arms wrapped around each other, buried in the noise and the dark. It lasted for hours. When the wind finally died, night had fallen. The temperature plummeted, the desert shedding its heat as quickly as a snake sheds its skin. They were covered in a fine layer of dust, looking like statues made of earth. They were shivering violently. "We can't light a fire," Cole said, his teeth chattering. "They might see it." They shared the single wool blanket Mrs. Klein had given them. They lay on the hard stone, bodies pressed together from hip to shoulder, sharing every scrap of warmth they generated. Nora could feel the heat of Cole's fever returning slightly, or maybe it was just the warmth of his blood. She pressed her face into his neck. "Are you afraid?" she whispered. "Yes," Cole admitted. "Are you? Terrified?" He turned his head and kissed her forehead. The grit was on his lips, but she didn't care. In the darkness of that cave, with the wind still moaning outside and men with rifles hunting them across the dark, The desire that flared between them was sharp and desperate. It wasn't the slow, healing exploration of their first night. This was urgent. This was a rebellion against death. They made love with a frantic tenderness, hands grasping, bodies moving together in a rhythm of survival. They needed to feel alive. They needed to prove that they were more than just prey. When it was over, they lay tangled together, breathless. "If this is all we get," Nora whispered, her voice fierce in the dark. "If they find us tomorrow?" "This was enough." "No," Cole said, gripping her hand. "It isn't enough. I want years. Nora, I want the cabin. I want the chickens. I want to see you grow old." By the third day, the water was almost gone. The canteen was light, sloshing with a hollow sound. They had been rationing it, taking only tiny sips to wet their cracked tongues. But the heat was relentless. Cole's wound was angry and red at the edges. He needed water to fight the infection. "There is a place," Cole said, his voice raspy. "About 5 miles east, a settlement." "Who lives there?" Nora asked, looking at his pale face with worry. "Outsiders," Cole said. "Mexicans. Indians who wouldn't go to the reservation. People the town threw away. They rode east." The settlement appeared out of the heat haze like a mirage. A cluster of adobe huts and brush shelters nestled against the bank of a dry riverbed. As they approached, dogs began to bark. Men emerged from the huts, holding old rifles and tools. They watched Cole and Nora with dark, suspicious eyes. Cole held his hands up, showing his empty palms. "We need water," he called out in Spanish. "My wife. She is thirsty, and I am hurt." A man stepped forward. He was older, his face a map of deep wrinkles, his hair braided with gray. He looked at Cole's bandages. He looked at Nora's exhausted, dust-streaked face. He saw the look of the hunted. He knew that look. It was the same look his own people wore. "Lower your weapons," the elder said to the young men. They were allowed to dismount. Women came forward with gourds of water, cool, sweet water drawn from a deep well. They washed Cole's wound and applied a poultice of crushed leaves that smelled of mint and earth. They gave them tortillas and beans. Nora sat with the women, watching them work. They spoke a mix of Spanish and a language she didn't know, but their hands were gentle. She saw a young mother nursing a baby, looking at Nora with a shy smile. She realized then how small her world had been. In Silver Creek, these people were spoken of as savages, as thieves. But here, they were just families trying to survive in a land that wanted to kill them, surrounded by neighbors who wanted to erase them. They are just like us, Nora thought. That evening, the elder sat with Cole and Nora by a small fire. "You are running from Claiborne," the elder stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Cole said. "His men were here yesterday." The elder said, "Asking questions, poking into our homes. We told them nothing. Not because we know you, but because we know him." Cole nodded. "Thank you. You can rest here tonight," the elder said. "But you cannot stay. If they find you here, they will burn this village." "I know," Cole said. "We will leave before dawn." The elder looked at the fire. "You can run to the mountains. You can run to the north. But a man like Claiborne, he is like a wolf. He does not stop until the prey is dead or he is—" He looked at Cole, his dark eyes serious. "You cannot run forever. Cowboy, the world is round. Eventually, you come back to the place you started. You have to face the wolf." They left while the stars were still out, guided by a young boy who showed them a hidden trail up the ridge that would mask their tracks. When they reached the crest of the ridge, the sun began to rise. The world below them was bathed in a light that was both beautiful and terrible, red as blood, gold as a wedding ring. They stopped the horses. They looked back the way they had come. Somewhere back there, in the dust, the posse was waking up. Somewhere back there was Silver Creek, and the grave of Silas, and the memories of pain. But ahead of them lay only wilderness. Cole looked at Nora. He saw the set of her jaw. He saw the strength that had been forged in the fire of the last few days. "The elder was right," Cole said quietly. Nora nodded. She looked down at the rifle scabbard on her saddle. She touched the cold metal. "We can't build a cabin on fear," she said. We can't plant a garden if we are always looking over our shoulders. No, Cole said. They turned their horses away from the rising sun. Toward the mountains. They would keep running for now. They had to heal. They had to survive. But both of them knew, as the red light washed over them, that the running had an end date. There would come a day when they would have to stop, turn around, and draw a line in the dust. Not today, Nora whispered to the wind. But soon. They rode on, two small figures against the vast, indifferent sky, moving toward a future they would have to fight to keep. The high mesas of the Northern Territory offered a view of the world that made human concerns look small. But to Nora Hayes and Cole Maddox, the weight of their lives felt heavier than the mountains themselves. They had been riding for 5 days. Their clothes were stiff with dust. Their horses were gaunt, and the water in the canteen was low again. They made camp in a dry ravine where the wind whistled through the sandstone arches. It was a cold, unforgiving place, and as the sun went down, casting long, bruised shadows across the rock, the silence between them finally broke. "We can keep going," Cole said, poking at the small fire they had risked lighting. "We can be in Wyoming in another week. The law there is thin. A man can get lost if he tries hard enough." Nora looked at the flames. She thought about the cabin they had whispered about. She thought of the white curtains and the chickens. It was a beautiful dream. But as she sat there, wrapping her arms around her knees, she realized that dreams built on running were just as fragile as smoke. "I will never be lost." "Cole," she said quietly. Cole looked up, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean that no matter how far north we ride, I will still be the girl from Silver Creek who was ruined in an alley." She said, "The story followed us to the ranch. It followed us here. If we go to Wyoming, I will just be waiting for someone to recognize you, or for someone to hear a rumor about me." She picked up a handful of dirt and let it slip through her fingers. "I am tired of being afraid of my own name. I am tired of letting men like Claiborne and Travis decide who I am." Cole watched her. He saw the steel that had been tempered in the heat of the last few weeks. He saw a woman who was done hiding. "So what do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to go back," Nora said. Cole didn't flinch, though his eyes darkened with worry. "If we go back, we are walking into the barrel of a gun. Claiborne will have every hired killer in the territory waiting." "Let them wait," Nora said, her voice rising. "I don't want to go back to die. I want to go back to live. I want to tell the truth, loudly, in the middle of the street. I want to look Mrs. Gable in the eye. I want to point a finger at Travis. I want to burn their lies down. Cole, and if we die doing it, well, at least we died standing up." Cole stared at her for a long time. Then, slowly, a grim smile touched his lips. He reached out and took her hand. "One hard stand," he said. "One hard stand." She agreed. They did not ride back blindly. They rode with the cold calculation of soldiers preparing for a siege. Their first stop was the settlement of the outsiders, the place where they had found water and mercy. The sun was beating down on the adobe huts when they rode in, the dogs barking a warning. The elder met them, his face impassive. "You have returned. We are going back to Silver Creek," Cole told him. "We are going to finish it, but we need help, not guns. We need a voice." He looked past the elder to a young man standing in the doorway of a hut. His name was Tomas. He was lean and hard, with eyes that had seen too much for his 20 years. Cole knew from their brief stay that Tomas had once worked the Claiborne herds. "Tomas!" Cole called out. "You were there, 5 years ago. You were on the ranch when Claiborne's brother was alive." Tomas stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. "I was there. You saw what he did," Cole said. "You saw how he treated the workers, how he treated the women. I saw." Tomas said, "He spat into the dust. He was a devil. I need you to say that," Cole said. "In town. To the judge. If there is one. To the people. If there isn't." Tomas laughed. A bitter, sharp sound. "You think a white man's town will listen to me? I am a half-breed to them. My word is worth less than a horse. They might not listen to you alone," Nora said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady. "But they will listen if you stand beside me. and beside him. Thomas looked at Nora. He saw the bruises on her face from the storm, the dirt on her clothes, and the fire in her eyes. He saw a woman who had been treated as less than human, just as he had. "Why should I risk my neck for you?" Thomas asked. "Because Claiborne is a sickness," Cole said. "And he won't stop with us. He will come for this place eventually. You know he will. He wants the water rights." Thomas looked at the elder. The old man gave a barely perceptible nod. Thomas sighed and walked back into the hut. When he came out, he was carrying a Warren Henry rifle and a hat. "I will ride with you," Thomas said. "But if I get shot, I'm going to haunt you." The next stop was the widow Klein's ranch. Mrs. Klein was feeding the chickens when they rode into the yard. She stopped, her basket on her hip, and watched them approach. She saw the grim determination on their faces, and she set the basket down. "I figured you might be back," she said dryly. "You forgot your wages. Mr. Maddox, we're going to town." "Mrs. Klein," Nora said. "We are going to call a meeting. We are going to tell everyone what Claiborne did, what he is doing." Mrs. Klein wiped her hands on her apron. "That is a dangerous game. Claiborne owns the sheriff. He doesn't own the truth," Cole said. "Mrs. Klein looked at the empty bunkhouse where Silas used to sleep. She looked at the fresh mound of earth on the hill where they had buried him. Her face hardened into a mask of granite. Silas was a good boy. She said, "He didn't deserve to die in the dirt for a rich man's pride." She walked into the house and came out a moment later with a double-barreled shotgun broken over her arm and a box of shells in her pocket. "I will ride with you," she said. "And I know 2 or 3 others. The Miller brothers down in the valley, and Old Man Henderson. Claiborne cut their fences last month. They are tired of being pushed. They gathered their small army. It wasn't much. Cole, Nora, Thomas, Mrs. Klein, and 3 grim-faced ranchers who had nothing left to lose. They rode toward Silver Creek as a single unit, the dust rising behind them like a banner. As they neared the town, the atmosphere changed. The air felt thick, charged with static. Word had spread. A drover had seen them on the road and ridden ahead. By the time they passed the first outlying shacks, the streets were unnaturally empty, but eyes were watching. Curtains twitched in windows. Men stood in the deep shadows of porches, hands hovering near their belts. Cole rode at the front, Nora beside him. He scanned the rooftops, the alleyways. He knew Claiborne would be ready. They rode straight down the main street. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of 24 hooves on the hard-packed earth. They stopped in front of the sheriff's office. It was high noon. The sun was a white disk directly overhead, bleaching the color from the wooden buildings, leaving no shadows for anyone to hide in. Cole dismounted. He helped Nora down. She smoothed her dusty trousers and stood tall. "Ring the bell, Mrs." Klein told Tomas. Tomas ran to the church next door. A moment later, the heavy iron bell began to toll. Clang, clang, clang. It was a sound usually reserved for fires or Sundays. It drew people out, slowly, hesitantly. The townsfolk began to emerge. The shopkeepers, the saloon girls, the blacksmith, the banker. They gathered in the street, forming a rough semicircle, keeping a safe distance. The door to the sheriff's office opened. Sheriff Harlan stepped out, followed by Deputy Travis. Harlan looked pale, his eyes darting nervously. Travis looked angry, his hand resting on his gun. "What is this?" Harlan demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "You are causing a disturbance." "Maddox?" "I told you to keep riding. We are done riding, Sheriff," Cole said. Nora stepped forward. She walked up the 3 wooden steps of the sheriff's office so that she stood above the crowd. She looked out at the faces she had known her whole life. She saw Mrs. Gable. She saw the preacher. She saw the men who had laughed at her in the saloon. She was shaking. Her hands trembled so hard she had to clasp them together in front of her, but she lifted her chin. "I have something to say," she said. Her voice wavered, thin and reedy in the hot air. Travis took a step forward. "Shut your mouth. Ruin. Get back to the saloon where you belong." Nora looked at him. She didn't flinch. I said I have something to say, she shouted. Her voice found its strength, ringing out clear and sharp. The crowd went silent. Even Travis stopped, surprised by the force of her voice. 3 years ago, Nora said, looking directly at the crowd, I was walking home, just like I do every night. I was dragged into the alley behind the livery. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some of the women looked away. I was held down. Nora continued. She didn't use graphic words. She didn't need to. The simplicity of the truth was more brutal than any description. I was hurt. I was torn. And when I came to this office, when I came to this man, she pointed a shaking finger at Sheriff Harlan. He told me to go home and wash up. He told me I was a liar. He told me the men who did it were too important to be punished. She turned her gaze to Travis. One of those men is standing right there. She said, Travis, he was one of them. And he is wearing a badge. Liar, Travis screamed. His face went red. She is a drunk. She is a whore. Don't listen to her. I saw it. The voice came from the street. It was Mrs. Klein. She stood by her horse, holding her shotgun. I saw the bruises on her arms the next day. Mrs. Klein said, I saw her try to hide them. And I know a beaten woman when I see one. And I know this man, Tomas said, stepping forward. He pointed at Cole. And I know the man he killed. The crowd turned to look at the young outsider. You call him a murderer, Tomas said, but I worked for the man he killed, Elias Thorne. He was a monster. He beat us. He whipped us. He treated women like cattle. This man, Cole, he stopped him. He fought a fair duel to save a girl, and for that, the rich men put a bounty on him. It is the same story, Nora cried out. It is always the same story. The powerful take what they want, and when we try to stop them, they call us criminals. They call us fallen. The crowd was shifting. The murmurs were growing louder. They were looking at Harlan. They were looking at Travis. The veil of silence that had hung over the town for years was beginning to tear. Then, the thunder of hooves drowned them out. At the far end of the street, a cloud of dust heralded the arrival of Ezra Claiborne. He rode a massive black stallion, flanked by 6 men. These were not ranch hands. These were hard men with tied-down holsters and cold eyes. Claiborne rode into the center of the gathering. The crowd parted like water, fear pushing them back to the boardwalks. Claiborne stopped his horse 10 feet from where Cole stood. He looked down from his saddle, a king looking at a peasant. Disperse! Claiborne roared. Go back to your homes. He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and waved it in the air. This man is a wanted killer, Claiborne shouted, pointing at Cole. I have a new poster right here. $500 for the man who brings him in dead or alive. He looked at Harlan. Sheriff, do your duty. Arrest this man, or shoot him. I don't care which. Harlan stood on the porch, sweat dripping down his face. He looked at Claiborne. He looked at the crowd, who were no longer looking at the ground. He looked at Nora, standing like a statue of judgment. Sheriff, Claiborne barked. Claiborne. Cole stepped forward. He didn't draw his gun. He just stood there, his hands loose at his sides. Your brother was a coward. Claiborne, Cole said. His voice was not loud, but it carried in the silence. He hurt people who couldn't fight back, just like you. You shut your mouth, Claiborne hissed. You can kill me, Cole said, but you can't kill the truth. Not anymore. Look around you. They know. Claiborne looked around. He saw the faces of the townsfolk. He didn't see fear anymore. He saw anger. He saw resentment. He saw Mrs. Klein leveling her shotgun at him. Kill him, Claiborne shouted to his hired men. Kill him now. One of the hired guns, a man with a scar across his nose, raised his rifle. No, Nora screamed. The gunman fired. Cole saw the movement. He dove to the right, rolling in the dust behind a water trough. The bullet struck the wooden post of the sheriff's office, sending splinters exploding into the air. A woman in the crowd screamed. Chaos erupted. Get to cover! Cole yelled. Thomas and the ranchers dove behind the watering trough and the hitching rails. They opened fire. The crack of rifles echoed off the false fronts of the buildings. Claiborne's horse reared, spooked by the noise. Claiborne fought for control, shouting orders that were lost in the din. His hired men dismounted, taking cover behind their horses and the corners of buildings. They unleashed a barrage of lead toward the sheriff's office. Nora was exposed on the steps. Bullets whizzed past her, thumping into the wood. She froze for a split second, the noise overwhelming. "Nora, get down!" Cole roared from behind the trough. She scrambled down the steps, but instead of hiding, she saw a rifle dropped by a fleeing bystander lying in the dust. It was a Winchester. She grabbed it. She rolled behind a stack of barrels near the general store. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was cold, crystal clear. She jacked a shell into the chamber. Across the street, she saw Mrs. Klein fire both barrels of her shotgun. One of Claiborne's men cried out, clutching his leg and falling. It was a war zone. Smoke drifted in the hot air, stinging the eyes. The sound was deafening, the sharp crack of pistols, the boom of rifles, the screams of horses. Cole popped up from behind the trough. He fired 2 shots. One of the hired guns on the roof of the hotel tumbled forward, landing with a sickening thud on the boardwalk. Travis, the deputy, had taken cover behind a rain barrel. He wasn't firing at the hired guns. He was scanning the street, his eyes wild with panic and rage. He saw Nora behind the barrels. "You witch!" Travis screamed. "You started this!" He raised his pistol, aiming directly at her. Nora saw the black bore of the gun. She saw the hate in his eyes. "Travis!" Cole shouted. Cole broke cover. He lunged across the open ground, trying to reach Nora. Travis fired. The bullet caught Cole. It grazed his side, spinning him around. He hit the ground hard, rolling to his knees, clutching his ribs. "No!" Nora screamed. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She raised the Winchester. She looked down the sights. She saw Travis, the man who had haunted her nightmares for 3 years, the man who was about to kill the only person she loved. She pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. Travis jerked backward as if yanked by an invisible rope. The bullet took him in the chest. He collapsed against the rain barrel, sliding down into the dust. His gun falling from his hand, he didn't move. The sight of the deputy falling sent a shockwave through the street. Ezra Claiborne, seeing his men falling and his deputy dead, realized the tide had turned. The town was fighting back. "I will burn this town," Claiborne screamed, wheeling his horse around. "I will kill you all." He spurred his horse, trying to ride down the alleyway to escape. Sheriff Harlan was still standing on the porch, pressed against the wall, his gun in his hand. He watched Claiborne run. He watched the man who had bought him, owned him, and humiliated him. He saw the crowd watching him. He saw the judgment in their eyes. Harlan raised his gun. His hand was shaking, but he steadied it with his other hand. "Stop!" Harlan shouted. Claiborne didn't stop. He turned in the saddle, raising his own gun to shoot the sheriff. Harlan fired first. The shot hit Claiborne in the back. The cattle baron arched his back, a look of profound surprise on his face. He slumped forward over the neck of his horse, then slid sideways, falling into the dirt of the main street. The shooting stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, ringing in the ears. The dust drifted through the shafts of sunlight like falling ash. One of Claiborne's surviving hired men dropped his gun and raised his hands. "I am done," he yelled. "I am done." Nora dropped the rifle. It clattered on the boardwalk. "Cole!" she gasped. She ran into the street. Cole was trying to stand, his face pale, blood seeping through his shirt at his side. Nora fell to her knees beside him. She wrapped her arms around him, cradling his head against her chest. She was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. "You are okay," she choked out. "You are okay." Cole winced, but he looked up at her. He reached up a bloody hand and touched her cheek. You have a hell of a name, Miss Hayes," he whispered weakly. "I had to," she wept. "I had to." The townsfolk began to creep out from their hiding places. They walked slowly into the street, stepping over the debris. They looked at Travis's body. They looked at Claiborne lying dead in the dust. They looked at Nora holding Cole. There was no cheering. There was no victory cry. There was only a profound, heavy shame. They looked at the woman they had shunned, the woman who had just fought to save them from a tyrant they had been too afraid to face. Mrs. Gable stepped off the boardwalk. She looked at Nora. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She just bowed her head and turned away. Sheriff Harlan walked down the steps. He looked older, smaller. He holstered his gun. He walked over to where Cole and Nora were. He looked down at them. "Is it over?" Nora asked, looking up at him with fierce, tear-filled eyes. Harlan looked at Claiborne's body. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is over." He took a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "I have to take him in." "Nora," Harlan said, "he just admitted to a killing in New Mexico, and there are bodies in the street." Nora tightened her grip on Cole. "You are not taking him." "I have to," Harlan said, "until the circuit judge gets here. We have to sort this out legal-like. If I don't lock him up, someone else might try to collect that bounty." "It is for his own safety." Cole nodded against Nora's chest. "He is right. Nora, let him do it." Nora looked at Harlan. "If you let anything happen to him, if you let anyone touch him, I won't," Harlan said. "I am done with Claiborne's orders." He helped Cole stand. Cole groaned, leaning heavily on the sheriff. They walked toward the jailhouse. The crowd parted for them, silent and watchful. That evening, the sun went down in a blaze of orange, painting the town in soft light. Cole sat on the cot in the small jail cell. His wound had been cleaned and bandaged by the doctor. It was painful, but not fatal. Nora stood on the other side of the bars. She had washed the dust from her face, but she hadn't changed her clothes. She wore the trousers and the shirt like a uniform. "How are you?" she asked softly. "I will live," Cole said. "Thanks to you." Nora reached through the bars and took his hand. "They are saying the judge will be here in 3 days. She said, 'Let him come,' Cole said." "I am not running anymore." Nora squeezed his hand. She looked out the window at the darkening street. The town was quiet. The piano in the saloon was silent. "I am not going anywhere." "Cole," she promised, "I will stand right here. I will tell the judge. I will tell the governor. I will tell the president if I have to. I know you will," Cole said. He smiled, a genuine, tired smile. Nora leaned her forehead against the cold iron bars. "They can't bury the truth anymore," she whispered. "We dug it up." "Yes," Cole said. "We did." Nora looked at him, her eyes shining in the twilight. "And I don't care what happens tomorrow, because today we won." She stood there as the night settled over the town, a lone sentinel guarding the man she loved, ready to face whatever morning brought. The fear was gone. In its place was something harder, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous to the men who relied on silence. She was Nora Hayes, and she was done being afraid. 3 days turned into 4, and then a week, while the dust of Silver Creek slowly settled. Cole Maddox sat on the edge of the narrow cot in the town jail. The cell was a box of iron and stone, smelling faintly of lye soap and old damp. But it was the most peaceful place he had known in years. His shoulder, bound in clean white linen, throbbed with a dull, distant ache rather than the sharp fire of infection. The doctor, a man who usually smelled of gin but had sobered up quickly after the shooting, said the muscle would knit, though the scar would remain. Cole didn't mind scars. He was a map of them. Every day at noon, the heavy door at the end of the corridor would creak open, and Nora would appear. She did not come as a visitor begging for time. She came as a woman claiming her place. She brought food cooked in the kitchen of the boarding house where Mrs. Klein had insisted she stay. Stews thick with beef, biscuits wrapped in cloth, coffee that was strong and hot. She would sit on the wooden stool on the other side of the bars, and they would eat together. "The town is quiet," Nora said on the 5th day, passing him a tin cup of coffee. "It is a strange kind of quiet, like a held breath." "They are waiting," Cole said, taking the cup. His fingers brushed hers, a lingering touch that said more than words. "They are waiting to see if the world is going to tilt back to the way it was, or if it has changed for good. It has changed. Nora said firmly. She wore a simple calico dress Mrs. Klein had lent her, but she wore it like a queen's robe. I won't let it go back. She ignored the stares of the deputy who had replaced Travis, a nervous young man named Miller who kept his eyes on the floor whenever Nora spoke. She ignored the whispers of the people on the street who still crossed to the other side when they saw her coming. She walked through the judgment as if it were nothing more than cobwebs. On the 8th day, the judge arrived. Judge Thaddeus Calloway was a circuit judge from the territorial capital, a man with a face like a dried walnut and a reputation for having zero patience for the antics of cattle barons. He rode into town in a dusty buggy, looked at the fresh graves in the cemetery, looked at the boarded-up windows of the Claiborne office, and declared that court would be in session the following morning. Since the town hall was little more than a glorified shed, the hearing was held in the church. It was the only building large enough to hold the curiosity and the guilt of Silver Creek. On the morning of the hearing, the pews were packed, ranchers from the outlying valleys, who rarely came to town except for supplies, sat shoulder to shoulder with the shopkeepers and the saloon workers, the families from the mixed settlement, usually unwelcome within the town limits, stood along the back walls, silent and watchful. Cole was brought in through the side door, handcuffed, though the young deputy looked apologetic about it. He was seated at a small table near the altar. Nora sat in the front pew, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Judge Calloway sat behind the pulpit. Using it as a bench, he banged a gavel that sounded like a gunshot in the hush of the sanctuary. "We are here to untangle a mess of violence, corruption, and death," the judge announced, his voice booming. "And I intend to leave this town cleaner than I found it." The testimony began. Sheriff Harlan, stripped of his gun but not yet his badge, tried to bluster his way through. He stood before the judge, sweating in his woolen coat, claiming that he had only been trying to keep the peace, that Claiborne had overpowered him, that he had shot the cattle baron to save the town. "I did what I could, Your Honor," Harlan wheedled, wringing his hat in his hands. "It is a hard country out here. A man has to make compromises." "Compromise is one thing, Sheriff," the judge said dryly. "Complicity is another. Sit down." Then came the witnesses for the truth. Tomas took the stand. He looked nervous, his eyes darting to the faces of the white townsfolk who had ignored him for years. But when he looked at Cole, he steadied. He spoke of the Claiborne Ranch, not as a business, but as a kingdom of fear. He spoke of the dead brother, Elias Thorne, and the cruelty that had sparked the duel 5 years ago. He was a man who liked to break things, Tomas said quietly. Horses, dogs, people. Cole stopped him. "That is the only crime he committed. He stopped a devil, Mrs." Klein marched to the front of the church like she was marching into battle. She laid her shotgun on the table before the judge, a visual punctuation to her testimony. "Ezra Claiborne cut my fences, poisoned my well, and threatened to burn me out," she declared. "And that man there," she pointed a calloused finger at Harlan, "looked the other way because his pockets were lined with Claiborne silver." Others began to stand. A blacksmith who had been beaten for overcharging Claiborne, a mother whose son had been run off the road by Claiborne's riders. The dam of silence broke, and the waters of truth rushed out, dark and undeniable. Then, the judge called Nora Hayes. A ripple of murmurs went through the room. The women in the middle pews, Mrs. Gable and the preacher's wife among them, stiffened, their face pinching with disapproval. Nora walked to the stand. She placed her hand on the Bible when asked, but she did not look at the judge. She looked at the congregation. "State your name," the judge said. "Nora Hayes, tell us what you know of the accused, Cole Maddox, and the events of the last weeks." Nora took a deep breath. She gripped a small lace handkerchief in her hand, twisting it tight, but her voice did not shake. "Cole Maddox saved my life," she said, "not once, but every day since he rode into this town. He saved me from a deputy who thought a badge was a license to hurt women, and he saved me from the belief that I was worth nothing." She turned her eyes to the women in the pews. "3 years ago, I came to you," she said. Her voice rose, cracking with the weight of the memory. "I came to this church, I stood on these steps with blood on my dress. I begged for help. I begged for someone to listen to what the rancher's sons had done to me. She looked directly at the preacher's wife. You told me not to frighten the congregation. Nora said, you told me to go away. You decided that my pain was inconvenient. You decided that the reputation of this town was more important than the truth. Tears spilled over her lashes, tracking through the dust on her cheeks. But she did not wipe them away. You called me ruined, Nora said, her voice trembling with a righteous fury. You called me fallen. But who fell? Was it me or was it you? When you looked at a neighbor in trouble and turned your backs. The church was dead silent. Mrs. Gable looked down at her lap, her face flushing a deep, mottled red. The preacher stared at the floor. Cole Maddox is not a saint, Nora said, turning back to the judge. He has scars. He has killed men. But he stood between me and the dark when this whole town, this whole righteous, praying town, left me to be devoured. If he is guilty, then there is not a single innocent soul in this room. She stepped down. The silence she left behind was heavy, suffocating. Finally, Cole was called. He stood up, the handcuffs clinking. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. He did not make excuses. He told the story of the duel in New Mexico simply, without embellishment. I drew on Elias Thorne. Cole said, he gave me no choice. I won't apologize for staying alive, and I won't apologize for stopping Claiborne's men. Why did you stay? The judge asked. You could have ridden on. You knew there was a bounty. Cole looked at Nora, sitting in the front pew. I stayed because for the first time in my life, I found something worth fighting for, Cole said. The judge deliberated for an hour. He sat in the high-backed chair, reviewing the notes he had scratched onto a pad of paper. The town waited. Finally, Judge Calloway stood. The warrant for Cole Maddox is based on a fraudulent claim. The judge ruled. The testimony here today has made it clear that Elias Thorne was a violent aggressor and that the charge of murder was a manipulation of justice by the Claiborne family. I am vacating the warrant. The bounty is null and void. A gasp of relief went through the room. Nora closed her eyes, letting out a sob she had been holding for days. However, the judge continued, looking sternly at Cole. You are a free man, Mr. Maddox, but hear me well. This territory is vast, and the law is thin. A piece of paper from me might not stop a vengeful cousin or a bounty hunter who hasn't heard the news. You are cleared, but you are not safe. The West does not forgive easily. The judge then turned his gaze to Sheriff Harlan. As for you, Harlan, the judge said, his voice dripping with disdain, you are a disgrace to the star you wear. You are removed from office, effective immediately. You will surrender your badge and your keys. Be grateful I am not hanging you for corruption. Your punishment is that you have to live among these people knowing they see you for what you are, a coward. Harlan stood up, his hands shaking. He unpinned the star from his vest and laid it on the table. It made a hollow clack against the wood. He turned and walked out of the church, a small, broken man, passing through rows of people who refused to meet his eyes. The hearing was over. The crowd began to disperse, flowing out into the bright midday sun. But the mood had shifted. The air felt cleaner, as if a storm had finally blown itself out. As Nora walked down the aisle, a woman, the baker's wife, reached out and touched her arm. I am sorry. Nora, the woman whispered. She looked ashamed. We should have done better. Nora looked at her. She didn't offer forgiveness, not yet. The wound was too deep, but she nodded. Better is all we can do now, Nora said. She walked out into the sunlight. She didn't hunch her shoulders. She didn't look at her feet. She looked at the horizon. She carried the scars of the last 3 years and the fresh trauma of the gunfight. But they were no longer chains. They were just history. Cole was waiting for her by the church steps. The deputy had removed the cuffs. He was rubbing his wrists, looking at the sky as if he had never seen it before. He saw her and smiled. It was a smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "Free?" Nora asked. "Free enough," Cole said. They walked together down the main street of Silver Creek. They passed the Saloon, where the piano player was tentatively starting a tune. They passed the general store, where the Claiborne brand on the wall seemed to have lost its looming power, looking now just like fading paint. They walked to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to the sagebrush and the dust. Mrs. Klein was waiting for them by her wagon. She looked at the two of them, seeing the way they stood close together, not touching but connected by an invisible thread. "The offer still stands." Mrs. Klein said, "I have that cabin on the South Ridge. It needs a new roof, but the walls are good. You could run a small herd, raise a family." Nora looked at the cabin in her mind. It was safe. It was known. She looked at Cole. He was looking north, toward the mountains that were purple jagged teeth against the blue sky. "We appreciate it, Mrs. Klein," Cole said, "truly. But I think we need to find our own ground." Mrs. Klein nodded, a small, knowing smile on her face. "I thought you might say that. Sometimes you have to go where the ghosts don't know your name." She reached into the wagon and pulled out a sack of supplies: flour, beans, coffee, and a new wool blanket. "Take this," she said. "Call it a wedding present, or just back wages. Don't argue with me." She climbed onto the wagon seat and snapped the reins. "Good luck to you both. Don't let the wind blow you away." They watched her roll away, the dust swirling behind the wheels. "We should go," Cole said, "before the day gets old." They went to the stable and saddled the horses. The roan mare and the bay gelding looked rested, their ears pricked forward. They rode out as the sun began to dip, painting the world in the indigo hues of evening. They rode past the last few shacks, past the cemetery where Claiborne and Silas were buried in the same earth, separated only by 6 feet of dirt and a world of difference. At the edge of town, they passed the alley behind the livery stable. Nora pulled her horse to a stop. Cole stopped beside her. He followed her gaze into the shadows of the alley. It was just a dusty, narrow passage between two buildings, filled with trash and gloom. But it was where her life had ended, and where it had begun again. Nora looked at it. She remembered the terror. She remembered the feeling of being small, of being prey. She remembered telling Cole, "I don't care about tomorrow." She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of sage and cooling earth. "I cared so much," she said softly. "I cared about what they thought. I cared about being accepted. I cared so much it nearly killed me." She turned to Cole. Her eyes were clear, reflecting the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "I still care," she said, "but not about them." She kicked her horse forward, turning her back on the alley, leaving the shadows behind. They made camp 5 miles out, on a rise that overlooked the vast, empty basin of the valley. They built a small fire, the flames licking at the dry mesquite wood. They sat close together under the new wool blanket, their shoulders pressing against each other. The night was immense, a dome of silence that stretched for 1,000 miles in every direction. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. Nora looked out at the dark. She knew what was out there: droughts that could wither a crop in a week, blizzards that could bury a cabin, men who might see a scar on a face and reach for a gun. "I don't know where we are going." "Really," Nora said. Her voice trembled slightly. "Thomas talked about that valley, but we might never find it. The crops might fail. We might freeze." She turned to face Cole. He was watching her, his face illuminated by the firelight, rugged and calm. "But I don't care about tomorrow," she whispered. She smiled, and it was a smile that transformed her face, wiping away the years of fear. "I don't mean it like I did before," she said. "I don't mean I want to give up. I mean, I don't care what the world throws at us. I don't care if it is hard. I don't care if we have nothing but this blanket and these horses." She reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I care about waking up and seeing you. I care about building something that is ours. I care about choosing, every single day, to keep going. As long as I am with you, tomorrow can do whatever it wants." We will face it. Cole covered her hand with his own. He looked at her with a fierceness that stopped his breath. He had spent his life drifting, convinced he was a man who destroyed things. But looking at her, he realized he could build. "I never thought I would have this," Cole admitted, his voice rough. "A home, a family. I didn't think I deserved it." "You deserve it," Nora said firmly. "We both do." Cole leaned in. He kissed her, slow and deep. It wasn't the desperate, frantic kiss of the cave, where death was knocking at the door. It was a steady kiss, a promise. It tasted of smoke and hope and the long, wide future. They lay back under the blanket, holding each other as the fire burned down to embers. The coyotes sang in the distance, but the sound was no longer lonely. It was just the music of the wild. They slept. The dawn came slowly, a gray line on the horizon that turned to pearl, then to pink, then to a blinding, glorious gold. The light spilled over the mountains, flooding the plains, chasing the shadows back into the earth. Cole and Nora woke with the light. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. They packed their camp, saddled the horses, and mounted up. They turned their faces toward the north, toward the unknown valley, toward the life that was waiting to be carved out of the wilderness. Nora glanced at Cole. He sat tall in the saddle, the morning light catching the brim of his hat. He looked at her and nodded, a silent question. "Ready?" Nora smiled. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated freedom. "I don't care about tomorrow," she repeated softly to the wind. But this time, the words were not a surrender. They were a battle cry. They meant that the fear of the future no longer controlled her. They meant that whatever tomorrow brought, storm or sun, hardship or joy, she would face it. They would face it together. She spurred her horse. "Let's ride." Side by side, two small silhouettes against the vast, golden expanse of the American West. They rode forward, leaving the dust of Silver Creek behind them, riding into a tomorrow that was finally, truly, their own. Thank you for listening to this story of Nora and Cole, and for journeying with us through the dust and redemption of the Wild West. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from and what you thought of the ending. Did Nora and Cole find the peace they deserved? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to From Wild West for more tales of the frontier, where love and survival go hand in hand. Share your thoughts in English, and I look forward to bringing you another adventure soon.